Welcome to Arthurian April, day 15, and today we are finally covering Sir Thomas Malory. Now, you have heard me invoke the name of Sir Thomas Malory a number of times during Arthurian April, and that is because his work, Le Morte d'Arthur, is really one of the greatest works, if not the greatest work, of the 15th century. It lives from an English literature perspective between the Canterbury Tales, about 100 years before, and Shakespeare about 150 years after. As I mentioned before, Le Morte d'Arthur has inspired everyone from John Boorman to T.H. White and pretty much anyone that came afterwards, because up until that point, much of the Arthurian story was still written in French. And Le Morte d'Arthur is not your little pocket novel. No, this is a total of 507 chapters, 21 books encompassing 8 total romances. And that takes its influence from everything from the pre-Vulgate to the alliterative Morte Arthur, and of course, our personal favorite here on Arthurian April with me, the prose Tristan. Because of that, there are parts of it that seem a little disjointed, but given the material that he's working from, I gotta give the guy credit. What's more fascinating from a scholarly perspective and a personality perspective is that we're not really sure who Thomas Malory was. We do know that he was writing this book in prison, and he refers to himself as a prisoner knight. And while you think that in the 15th century this would be relatively easy to find out, not so much the case. There are multiple Thomas Malorys that could be the Sir Thomas Malory, and they are all over Great Britain. There are 4 in particular. Most prominently and the most widely accepted for the longest amount of time was a man named Thomas Malory of Newbold Revel in Warwickshire. And he was in jail and in prison and doing crimes all over the place, including ravishment of a woman, which means taking a woman without consent. Now, this seems a little bit weird because so much of Le Morte d'Arthur is about knights behaving honorably, right? It's about chivalry, it's about protecting, it's about doing the right thing and using the cross and the teachings of Christ as this quest to go forward and find the Grail. In fact, there's even a section where Lancelot is basically critiquing someone who has a background very similar to this particular person. The translation is, "What?" said Sir Lancelot. "Is he a thief and a knight and a rapist of women? He does shame the order of knighthood, contrary to his oath. It is a pity that he lives." So, a little bit ironic. The other thing is, if it is this particular Thomas Malory of Newbold Revel, he would have been very old during the creation and the writing of this book in jail. Now, it's not impossible, but it is rare for someone to have been of that advanced age, like in your 70s or 80s, writing something this intense and getting it published, which is what happened. There are 3 other potential Thomas Malorys, my favorite being the Thomas Malory of Hutton Conyers. And this person was identified by looking at the dialect inside of the book itself. Critics argue that the actual dialect is from the north and not from Warwickshire, and therefore would place Thomas Malory in and around Yorkshire. This particular Thomas Malory is more age appropriate, but again, we still don't really know for sure. Malory, whoever he was very lucky because he was also living at the point when a man named William Caxton, a publisher, arguably the first publisher in the English language, brought the printing press to London. The initial title of Le Morte d'Arthur was The Whole Book of King Arthur and His Noble Knights of the Round Table. Caxton decided in his, marketing speech to narrow that down to Le Morte d'Arthur. So for the first time, we see Arthur stories in far more print and far more available than ever before. The reception was not always positive. This was considered a very violent book, and in fact, even modern audiences are amazed by how much violence and fighting and death and slaughter there is. There's also the ravishment and raping of women. There is also the threat of that. There is also the whole adultery story of Guinevere and Lancelot. Interestingly, though, despite the fact that it is very much written in English, the main character, very arguably, is still Lancelot. His story takes up the most, and his journey is the most compelling of all the characters. Many also see the overall narrative as a commentary on the Wars of the Roses, which were happening concurrently with the time that this book was being written. We will never know for sure what Malory was in prison for, but it's very possible that it had to do with political affiliations, or, as we learned earlier, just being kind of a general jerk. In terms of translations, if you want a wonderfully edited version of Caxton's manuscript, the Vinever translation is fantastic. And it really gives you a feeling of this language, which was being literally, by Caxton, standardized for the first time. As literacy was becoming more popular, English was changing from spoken to written. And what's fascinating is that as the written gets standardized, so does the spoken language. Do I recommend reading Le Morte d'Arthur? Well, it is a bit zany, it is quite violent, it is hard to follow, but it's definitely fun to read. Some of the writing, though, is very beautiful, and it absolutely influenced works that came after. My favorite section, which is most often quoted, is from the end of the book after the death of King Arthur, and I will read it for you right now. Yet some men say, in many parts of England, that King Arthur is not dead, but had by the will of our Lord Jesu into another place. And men say that he shall come again, and he shall win the Holy Cross. I will not say it shall be so, but rather I will say here in this world he changed his life. But many men say there is written upon his tomb this verse, Hic jacet Arcturus requondum reque futurus. Excuse my bad Latin, but essentially that says, here lies King Arthur, the once and future king.